It is 3 o'clock on October 23rd, 2024. I will now call to order the Diversion Authority Land Management Committee to order. Could we get a roll call of our members, please?
Mr. Sherling.
Here.
Mr. Stamnus.
Here.
Ms. Derrick. Mr. Campbell.
Here.
Mr. Borboom.
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson.
Here.
Mr. Gust. Mr. Gust. Mr. Breitling. Ms. Majo.
Here.
Ms. Turnberg. Mr. Zimmerman.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and a special welcome to our newest member, Jake Gust, who is representing the Cass County Joint Water Resource District. Welcome, Jake. You have had an opportunity to review the minutes of the previous meeting of July 24th. Are there any corrections or additions or a motion to approve?
I'll offer a motion to approve the minutes as presented in the packet.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And the order of agenda is in front of you. Are there any additions to the agenda? Or a motion to approve?
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 And the agenda is approved. Item number 4, the RIMP loan update. Jody, you want to do that for us?
I will. So in your packet, we thought since there's been so much discussion recently about the RIMP program that maybe we would do just a quick review for people who are not quite as familiar with the program and an update where we're at with the program. For those of you who are not here when the program was created, the project recognized that there could be some additional support needed to help with the rural farmsteads and businesses to help them relocate. The Uniform Relocation Act does provide for relocation payments for selected displaced properties. However, those are primarily residential properties, and it's not really structured for farmsteads and those rural businesses. So this half of this board member, including Commissioner Sherling, and I know Eric over here, helped devise this program some years ago just to help supplement some of the funding that would be available for those relocations. Some of the goals that were in place is we wanted to ensure that the farmsteads that were here had the opportunity to remain local. Part of that is the economic vitality of those farmsteads. We recognize that rebuilding a farmstead is a big lift. It's a heavy endeavor, both from a time standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. And so being able to ensure that they're able to relocate and they have the support necessary to do that was important to us. There are a couple of things that the farmsteads and businesses need to have. They need to operate a business, a farm, or a nonprofit from the displaced site to be eligible for RIMP. So when property owners are interested in the RIMP program, we do require that they provide us with necessary documentation to essentially prove that they do have a business on site. That business has to be performed rurally, meaning they can't just easily relocate it into Fargo. And then they also have to prove to us that any structures that are out on site are used for the business purposes. This is a loan, and so the owners of the displaced farms are required to spend the RIMP payments on the reestablishment of their operations. So we don't give them $1 million and they're buying a house down in Arizona and spending, the remainder of it at building a barn here. All of it has to be built here. Those funds are put in an escrow, and we go through a fairly laborious process of ensuring that all the funds that are spent on the RIMP loan program are spent on eligible expenses. Then after 5 years, that loan is forgiven at 20% a year for the following 5 years. Again, we have a pretty lengthy 27-step process that we go through. So when we come in and we present a RIMP loan to either the Cass County Joint or the MCC JPA, in the background, we've gone through a pretty heavy process. One of the first ones that I already noted would be that pre-approval process, because we don't want our team engaging working on something that the board is going to determine to be ineligible. It's actually one of the rare times that we'll bring someone forward with what I would call a negative recommendation or a recommendation to not approve something, so that we do have that backing of the board. So if we can talk to the property owners and let them know that they're not eligible, sometimes they'll step back, but sometimes we do have to bring that to the board, and then the respective boards do take that under consideration. Once that is done, then we have our team members, our land agents, engaging with the property owners to make sure we're capturing everything. And so Ken Helvey's back here trying to avoid stepping up to the microphone, but we're not going to let him do that today. And he's one of the land agents that's been assigned quite a few of these complex relocations. And then Ole Olafson, who's with HDR, is the one that helps us create those RIMP reports. And those RIMP reports are a little over 20 pages typically. And there's a lot of work, there's a lot of bids, there's a lot of communications with those property owners to get that in place. And of course, it funnels back and forth through legal and is a part of our comprehensive settlement. So a lot of work goes into these. We typically say it takes us at least 2 months to produce a RIMP report. And again, we don't want to be engaging parties in anything that we don't think that they'd be eligible for. And then the replacement site has to be constructed within a couple of counties. So on the North Dakota side, that's going to be the Cass, Richland, Barnes, or Trail counties. And then on the Minnesota side, it's the Clay, Wilkin, Becker, and Norman counties. So just by kind of numbers alone, the overall budget that the board has authorized us to expend is $20 million. To date, we have a little over $12.3 million that we have said is eligible or has been spent, meaning it's in a RIMP report, it's in the closing documents, and everybody's agreed that this is what they're eligible for. Doesn't mean they have to spend the full amount, but they do have to give us notification that they wouldn't be spending any more before we pulled those funds out of escrow and then kind of put it back into our budget. We have offered just under $3 million in loans, meaning the boards have already determined that they're eligible for the loan, but we have not settled with those particular farmsteads or businesses, so those have not been signed on the dotted line, meaning those funds have not been placed in an escrow account. We do have about 3.5 in estimated loans where we haven't done a pre-approval and we haven't authorized the loan yet. That leaves us with just over $1 million left in this budget. Eric and I meet bi-weekly on this. I think that's how regular that is. Those bi-weekly meetings, though, we run through, what withdrawals have occurred in the past 2 weeks and how much funding is remaining in that. So we do keep a pretty close eye on this, and we do watch which ones have closed out, which ones are just starting, and then also making sure that we have all the necessary paperwork documented in our system. So just for your awareness, if you can follow my cursor a little bit here, if you look like this green dot here, that actually happens to be Mr. Westby. Mr. Westby has relocated where you can kind of see this point right here. So just on the other side of SE2B, he has a storage business and his personal residence. So he was able to do a land exchange with us so he could relocate his business fairly close to where his current business is. He is currently in the process of making that relocation, so that hasn't been completed yet. This purple dot's right here. These are the Savagos. They were right in the middle of the Camel Hump. They've actually relocated right here, right off the Cheyenne River. And so if you can kind of trace all the dots, like this purple one, that's the yellow, this is the Richard Farm, and they've relocated a little bit probably further away than most of our property owners. But you can see, everywhere where we've authorized a RIMP out of the upstream mitigation area, and then where they are relocating to outside of the UMA. These are our specific farm sites, so I'm going to have Ken come up and we're going to talk through these. He can give a little bit more detail on this. Again, Ken Helvey is with SRF, and he's one of our land agents that's been assigned. All of these that you'll see here today, again, we're not going to go through all of them, but you can kind of see some of how these structures are being rebuilt and the significance of rebuilding some of these farmsteads.
All right, thanks. I didn't know I was speaking, so I'll just have to, I don't have any prepared remarks. So in front of you is, as Jody said earlier, one of my roles is to implement this program with the different farmsteads. And so we work with the owners to, go through their documentation, make sure that they're demonstrating and documenting that they've spent the money to get to the point where we're going to initiate the loan, but then to make sure that they're spending the money appropriately for the loan, that the loan funds that we're going to disperse. The loans are dispersed just like a construction draw. They document certain expenses. We recommend those. Eric and Jody also review those. And then those are dispersed. We make sure we get invoices, copies of canceled checks, paid invoices. We're pretty diligent about making sure that the money is being spent in the way that is intended by the program. So one of the things that I do is, just because we are handing out millions of dollars, is I do from time to time drive around and take some photos to make sure that people are actually constructing, consistent with what we're paying for. So that's what you see here. Over the course of the last handful of months, they asked for some photos. This is 6G Farms, which was Ryan Richards' farmstead that was in the Camel Hump. Jody showed you, they're building a little bit farther out south of Mapleton, but these are, you can tell by the snow, these are a little bit old, but they're putting up their grain handling facilities, and right now they're also starting to construct their buildings, and Ryan's also moving to this site. The cost to build the new home is not part of the RIMP program. That's separate. These funds are only for the agricultural operation. So that's just obviously some grain handling. This is, that kind of got mislabeled. The big building is actually Brett Odegaard's. The big building on the upper left, Brett Odegaard is kind of in the south part of the property. He owns some land basically directly to the west of the property that he was already on, and he constructed his facility there. It's a fairly large building. You can tell by the vehicles the scale of that property. He had multiple buildings at his old location, and he consolidated into one pretty large building. The other pictures are of the Nipsteads. They were their farmstead was very close to Brett's. They own some property just south of Highway 46 in Richland County, and they're building on their own land there. I will say, from an agricultural standpoint, largely folks have moved to other land that they already owned. Savageos, Nipsteads, Odegaards, Richards, those kind of the four big farm operations. They've all moved to land that they previously owned, that they were already farming. So this is just, so the upper left picture that's the Odegaard building as it was being constructed. The other three pictures are just kind of we put those in there because it's just going to give you an example of, Brett Odegaard. This isn't really RIMP related, but it's relocation related, that we're dealing with more than just putting up buildings here. Brett Odegaard had a pretty big machine shop in one of his buildings. And also, under the Uniform Act, we need to move those items and get them reinstalled and rewired and all the other things that would go with that. So we also, in addition to the RIMP program, work through all those relocation reimbursements with all the different owners. This is Savageo's property. They've relocated what is about maybe a mile and a half or so west of where their other site was, just west of the inlet structure. Again, they put up a new building. Terry and Christy Savageo lived on the old farm, but they bought a house in town, and Joe actually did build a house on this property. Again, the costs associated with that house were not included in the RIMP program, but that's how they chose to reestablish their farmstead. I stand for any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
Commissioner Schaefer?
Yes.
Thank you. Not a comment, or not a question, rather a comment. I know that over time we've had vast discussions about how the RIMP program would work and what the intention of it is, and so much of the history of Cass and Clay counties revolve around its agriculture integrity. And so thank you for the presentation today, because it really is good for us to see how these dollars have been used to continue legacies of family farms and generational farms and even new farms. And then I am a little struck too to look at the amount of buildings and implements and companies that all are part of the Red River Valley that are also benefiting from the work as well. So as we continue negotiations with other farmers, I just really am grateful that we have the opportunity to utilize the RIMP program to help to make back whole some of these operations that have been affected by the project.
Thank you, Commissioner. Certainly, go ahead.
Sorry, this, just as a matter of commentary, I would proffer that most of these farmers probably wouldn't have settled if the only benefits were the Uniform Act if we only facilitate this program using Uniform Act benefits, because the Uniform Act doesn't rebuild buildings, and we would have had in my opinion, we would have had some struggles with settlements without this program. It's really been very beneficial and pretty well received.
Great, thank you. And I know Jake has utilized, he's, boots on the ground utilizing this program too. Maybe you want to just share your reflections on how it's
right.
Worked for you.
As most of you know, there's been a lot of criticism over how we dealt with Oxbow. And a lot of the people that are getting the RIMP loans are in that area. And I feel that the RIMP loan program has blunted a lot of criticism over that issue.
Good, thank you. I guess one question I would have, you've been back to the DA twice now for funds. Do you anticipate coming back again, or where are we at?
I can see Tony Grinberg looking at me from the back row, so the answer is no, we will not be coming back. We don't anticipate. That's one of the things we do review on a biweekly basis is, we're guessing when we go through the review of who will be eligible or not. And so our guess has been fairly accurate to this point. I think the initial budget was $5 million. This was years ago. And really, I think that was a test, right, to see if this would be a successful program, if people would want to engage in the program. And like Ken said, it's been really successful. It is an active part of our negotiations to settle up some of the most complex relocations that we're working on. I have great empathy for people who have to move their home. I have greater empathy for people whose entire livelihood is tied up in that piece of land, and even greater empathy when it's something that has been in their family for over 100 years. And so we are asking a lot of these property owners, and I do think that this program, even through some of our more challenging discussions and the heavy lift it is on us internally, is fully worth it. And I do think it is supported by the property owners who are interested in relocating. And we have some who are not. We have some who said, this is a good time for me to retire and I don't have anybody to pass it along, but we have plenty who are eligible for the program. And for the most part, willing participants and have been really easy to work with. And so again, Ken takes a heavy lift of that, and so does Oli with HDR. Really, there are two land agents that are helping us kind of manage this program. So,
okay. Anyone else? Any questions, comments? All right, then we'll move on to item number 5. Thank you, Ken. The guidance document for mitigation of impacted private structure sites in the UMA. And Eric, you've got that one.
Good afternoon. Thank you. We were trying for the world's longest memo title. I think we're in the running still. In your packet is a memo that several pages long, deals with kind of a unique portion of structure sites in the upstream mitigation area. The cover memo in your packet, starting on, I guess whatever page that is, 18, provides a brief highlight. I thought I'd just maybe summarize that and then walk through a bit of this memo for your awareness. And Mary asked me earlier before the meeting, some of you that may have been around a while might remember we've presented this to the committee several years ago. We're bringing it back because we've made some edits and tweaks, and I'll walk through some of that. But back to the cover memo on page 18, if you recall, the Diversion Authority entered in, well, we have several permits, of course. We also had entered into a settlement agreement with upstream entities. And through that process, in the third paragraph here, it talks about one of our conditions was to provide flexible compensation or mitigation to properties where we could. And so going into that, I think we all had our eyes open, heads up, and said, all right, yeah, we can do that. We can provide flexible compensation and flexible mitigation. So we committed to that in the settlement agreement. This document aims to define what is flexible compensation and flexible mitigation. And in particular, we have 4 mitigation zones in the upstream mitigation area. Zone 1 is by far the largest, and unfortunately, we don't have any flexibility in Zone 1. Zone 1 requires that we remove all the structures, and we have to prohibit any development. But in Zones 2, 3, and 4, we have some flexibility, and so this memo is really focused on areas in Zones 2, 3, and 4. So with that as a bit of a backdrop, just turning to the memo itself, there's a brief introduction, very similar to what you had seen on the cover memo. There's a series of definitions on, I guess, 3-4 pages of definitions, making sure that we're being very clear in what we're defining. And a lot of these defined terms are things that are also defined in the settlement agreement, in the PRAM, in other documents that we're using for the property acquisition and property mitigation efforts. Then a few pages later, we get into a process. And this process section lays out a 12-step process, 8-step process that walks through how we would identify structures that would be eligible for this flexible mitigation, identifies the process for establishing some cost estimates to mitigate these structures, identifies the processes for approval. And then following that, maybe where I spend a little bit more time on page 9 of the memo, talks about potential mitigation actions. And so what we're really talking about here is we have a structure that is not in the 100-year floodplain, but is elevated above that, but might fall within an area that is affected by the 500 or a larger floodplain. And so under those situations, we always have the option of buying out that structure if it's impacted. That's pretty straightforward. We also have some options of wet floodproofing. And so wet floodproofing is a process. FEMA has some approved infrastructure that you can install in basically the foundation or the lower levels of the walls of a structure that allows floodwaters to come in and through the structure without damaging the walls or integrity of the structure. And those have to be passive systems without human intervention. So wet floodproofing is an option that could be considered. There are some buildings in the region that have been wet floodproofed. My understanding is the wedding venue just south of Moorhead has a couple structures that have some wet floodproofing vents in them. Dry floodproofing is really more applicable to new construction, not real applicable. It's really hard to retrofit a dry floodproofed building, but that is an option that's been identified. Number 4 would be elevating a building, and so fairly easy if you can imagine elevating a building. How might you do that? Some criteria in here to explain elevating. Number 5 then is talking about levies, and so we've had quite a bit of discussion about levies. And in particular, we're not talking about accredited or FEMA certified levies. These would be uncertified, non-accredited earthen levies that would provide protection for those structures that are above the 100-year floodplain, but may be impacted from a 500 or PMF level. And so the memo explains what design criteria would be used for those situations. And then number 6 is relocation. So if you've got a shed or an outbuilding of sorts that's in a lower area, perhaps relocating it to a dry spot on the site would be a mitigation solution. And so this memo identifies, the next few pages just identify the sites that have been identified as being eligible or having structures that would qualify for these procedures in this memo. A few other details laid throughout there. So that provides kind of a backdrop of what's in the memo, and maybe you're asking, well, why did we bring this back forward? The original version of this did include consideration of some cemeteries. as we knew we had a few cemeteries that were impacted. And those have really been addressed. We have separate MOUs with all of the cemeteries, and the mitigation for the cemeteries has been handled via that MOU process. And so removed out of this memo, and it's been clearer in here that we're really dealing with private structures. So structures that are held by private parties, not publicly or cemetery type structures. And so with that, we had a couple rounds of additional review of this. It's been routed through a technical team, through the management team, legal reviews. Jody, myself have been involved in reviewing all this document. And we're at a point now where, frankly, we wanted to bring it back for review of this board, this committee. I think we're hoping that the DA board will also review this. We're now dealing with a number of property owners that are in these areas, and we expect that some of this site mitigation work will become more common in our discussions, and we're thinking it will be in our benefit to have the sort of committee's review and the board approval of this document as we step forward. One last thing I would mention, Jody just pulled up a version of some of the sharpest committee members sitting around the table here weighed in and noticed that there was a missing link. The language that's highlighted is not in the version that you've seen in the memo, but that language is in the PRAM, and it is in our actual flowage easement document. And so it was an oversight on our part, so we've put it in the memo. It's in the definitions section, and so wanted to draw that to your attention. With that, that was a lot of words. Happy to take any comments or questions you have. Otherwise, I think we're looking for a recommendation from this committee to approve this to the DA board tomorrow.
Questions for Eric? Any questions for Eric? I know this was a big conversation when we were first getting our arms around how the mitigation was going to work. And there was a lot of conversation with landowners that this might be something that they would want to pursue. But I think as time has gone on, that interest has kind of waned. But it really is a good solution, especially for folks that are in the fringe areas, and they don't really need to pack it in, but they can just move a couple things around and still be successful. So, Commissioner Campbell.
Yeah, now that those properties have been identified that might be able to have some of those work done within those zones, how have we incorporated that mitigation into our lands budget?
Yes, so it kind of breezed through a bit of the process, but we've been preparing what we call a mitigation matrix. And so that matrix identifies the various options that would be eligible for any given structure on any given site. That matrix gets reviewed, gets presented to the appraiser, and then the appraiser has been using that mitigation matrix in their appraisal report to make sure that our offer to those property owners includes the compensation for either buying out or relocating a certain building. And so from a budget standpoint, this has all been included in our analysis previously. And maybe I would just add a comment to Mary's mention earlier. We do have, you can see the list of sort of eligible sites. One of those properties happens to be in Minnesota, and they have gone through and elevated a building that's in compliance. We've been out there and verified the elevations. And so I think that was an example where this document was helpful. And I anticipate there may be a few more as we go, but not all of these structures will want this type of solution. We're hoping that some of them will as we inch forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or a motion to approve this recommendation to the diversion board?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Dr. Zimmerman, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Charlene?
Yes.
Mr. Stamnes?
Yes.
Ms. Derrick?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Borboom?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Gust?
Yes.
Mr. Breitling?
Yes.
Ms. Majo?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to item number 6, OIN 1080Y and OIN 1926, sale of excess land recommendation. Jody.
Yes, so in your packet, I'm going to go through both of these because we could probably take the same motion. The first one is OIN 1080. This is just a small parcel. It's a sliver right along SE2B. This property owner to the east, so on the dry sign, actually owned all of this and wanted to sell that whole parcel when we got the final design drawings for SE2B. What we didn't need with this sliver kind of outlined in yellow. There's a fairly good portion of this that's going to be necessary for temporary construction easement over the next couple of years on SE2B. And so we did take that in consideration when recommending a sale price. We are estimating this to be about $6,700 an acre. That does have the flowage easement over it. Again, there's a pretty good chunk of this that's going to be tied up in the TCE for the next couple of years. So the overall sale price of this, boy, I already forgot, Eric. Did I put that on there? So it's just $53,000 for that, just under 8 acres.
Questions? Okay, go ahead.
The next one is OIN 1926. This is a little bit of a different parcel. It's 11.95 acres. We are recommending a sale price of $5,500 per acre, so a total of $65,700. 1080 was going to be ag land. This is not ag land. This is kind of more like a rural recreational land. There's a lot of trees, so I would anticipate somebody would want to purchase this for future hunting property. And this would be sold additionally with a flowage easement over it. So you can see there was a house here. All of this has been removed. There's still access to the site, but all those trees do remain on site. So,
Any questions for Jody on that parcel? Is there a motion to approve this? Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Charlene?
Yes.
Mr. Stamnes?
Yes.
Ms. Derrick?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Borboom?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Gust? Mr. Breitling? Ms. Majo?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
And that is everyone.
Thank you. Item 7, OIN 837, sale of excess land recommendation. Jody.
so this parcel, the board has already authorized us to sell. It is kind of in the middle of the upstream mitigation area. The board authorized us with a recommended market value at $7,500 for the entire parcel. We've gone through the entire excess lands policy, this one and the next agenda item. And on this particular one, we offered it to the member entities, then we went ahead and offered it to the previous property owner, then the neighboring property owners, and it goes out for public sale. At this point for public sale, what we'll be utilizing is our website, and then Amy, who's back here, if you haven't met her yet, has been helping me push these forward on all of our social media platforms, including my own LinkedIn, trying to, kind of engage property owners who might be interested in it. We didn't get any interest in it at the $7,500, but we did have a property or a private individual come forward and ask if he could purchase it for $4,500. He actually is the neighboring property owner on this, but isn't willing to pay the full price of $7,500. I am recommending this sale because each year we are paying just under $1,800 to mow and weed the property. And so we'll chew through that $4,500 that he's offering us pretty fast. And of course, there's a lot of staff time because we do have staff go down there every other week, not being used as a dump site. So I'm making the recommendation that we sell this at the $4,500.
So at what point do you engage an auctioneer?
You know, I have been working to engage our auctioneer, and we're playing a bit of phone tag. There are some of our larger parcels are the ones I'd be a little bit more concerned about. Some of them I've had the previous property owner come to me and want to negotiate a lower price than what the board has authorized, and I've not been willing to bring that forward. In both those circumstances, the previous property owner has been willing to purchase it. I had another parcel that somebody wanted to pay less than what the board has authorized. I don't think that that's viable. I wouldn't recommend that. And then today, actually, we had a gentleman come in our office and right off the street and asked if it was still available for purchase. And so we'll move forward with that. So we do have Pfeiffer's. They do have a contract with us. So I would suspect on some of these larger parcels that we go ahead and move forward with that. I included this memo that was originally a part of the authorization. So this is just over 1 acre. So it's about 1.5 acres. And again, when we get down to the map here, it's in the UMA, it's in zone 1. No structures can be built on this. So it doesn't have a lot of value outside of the neighboring property owner using it for ag purposes. The other parcels where I've had property owners want to negotiate with me are not in the upstream mitigation area. They're protected. And so it wasn't something I was willing to drop the price on based off the recommendation we brought to the board. So it's sometimes I'll I'll take it to the board. And sometimes I'm like, I just don't think that's in the best interest. So
I guess I certainly understand the maintenance on it, and these aren't big parcels, so I don't really have an objection to approving this, but I sure want to make sure that we're getting these out to the public, and it's a competitive process, and I want to make sure that the public is really aware of this, and making sure that if Pfeiffer's isn't going to be responsive, then there are other ways of doing a public auction as well.
Eric and I talked about that yesterday, so we're working on it. But you won't see those larger parcels coming forward like this until we would have that opportunity. So if I do think that there's greater value in it, I would hold them back.
Yeah, and I get that too, but I think it's important to be consistent, even with the smaller parcels as well. So, time is money too. So I guess I would turn to the committee here and look for your recommendations and thoughts. Commissioner Campbell, are you about to say something? I can see you leaning in. Okay. Okay, thank you. There's been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? I guess my only thought would be to really pursue our policy as it's written. I think it's well thought out, and I would hate to see this brought back consistently.
Yeah, the policy just says public sale, so it was a little bit, didn't say it had to go to auction, doesn't say it has to go to a private realtor, it just says public sale. So once we put them up for public sale, then, and the policy also says market value, and I think that's kind of the key. Like, what is the market value of a 1 acre parcel in the middle of the upstream mitigation area surrounded by farmland? Mm-hmm. And when Eric and I talk through these, and we tend to talk through before we bring the initial recommendation to you, what is the value of that? If it's tillable acreage and it's a significant, we've had some private sales out there that help us kind of gauge that. For us on this one, then I think, looking back at it, the market's not demanding a 1 acre parcel at the original price that we brought forward and recommended to you. So just to kind of mitigate the ongoing maintenance of this. But again, those larger parcels would have to go out for a public auction through an auction house. And I don't think that we would be willing to negotiate down on whatever we brought forward to the board.
And if we were having to purchase this property, I guarantee it would be not this price.
Probably not.
Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Stamnis? Ms. Derrick?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Borboom?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Gust?
Yes.
Mr. Breitling?
Yes.
Ms. Monjo?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you. Item 8, OIN 2185, sale of excess land recommendation.
So this is very similar to the previous one. It's actually in the neighborhood of the previous one. It's just south of that property. This is 2185. The previous property is just up here to the north. So they're in pretty similar distance with each other. Again, we went through the full excess lands policy. We had put this out on the street at the proposed price of $10,500. We did not get a response on this one. It is a little larger than the last parcel. It's sitting at 2.44 acres. We did have a private property owner. My understanding just in conversations with them is be a hobby farmer. So he'd like just a couple of acres to be able to take his family out there and have a large garden and plant whatever he would like. And so he did come back. He asked if there was any way we can negotiate on the price. I told him I would bring it forward at the same time that I brought the last one into you. And so we do have a recommended sale price to you before you. Please note that the annual expenses for weeding and mowing on this one is about $2,400 a year plus staff time on top of that to go ahead and just make sure that nothing's being dumped out there and that the land is being maintained. We will still own this parcel right here, this rectangle. That is something we still own. It is out for sale, and so we'll continue to work on selling that piece, but he is interested in this one right here.
Great. Thank you. Questions, comments? Yes, Matt.
Thank you, Commissioner Shirley. Say, I have one question. Are they allowed to place basically gardening fencing around there?
They are.
Oh.
For the flowage easement, they can put fencing up.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or motion?
I would move to approve.
Thank you, Matt. Is there
I'll
a second?
second.
Thank you, Brenda. Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Shirley?
Yes.
Mr. Stamnes?
Yes.
Ms. Derrick?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Borboom?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Gust?
Yes.
Mr. Brightling?
Yes.
Ms. Majo?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes.
And that is everyone.
Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 9, other business.
Well, Eric and I do have a little other business to take up with you, Commissioner Shirley.
Okay.
So we anticipate this might be your last lands committee meeting. So we did want to acknowledge that today and say thank you. I know you and Eric have spent about a decade together on this project, so I haven't been with you quite as long, but I do appreciate all your work and your tenacity and passion for the project and the land and everything that you've done. I know it's not been easy. I know there's probably scars and maybe a little PTSD from some of your public meetings in the past. But it certainly has gotten us where we're at today, where we're building a project. And so Eric and his team worked really hard on something for you. So we have a little gift to present to you today.
So do you remember back then when we had only acquired a few little chunks of land? Back in 2018, and then can you imagine how much progress we've made and now all the land we've bought now?
Oh, that's
So we
great.
present you with a then and now version of our land status report.
Okay, so you should have a picture of me before.
Like the President of the United States.
We thought about
Great. Oh, well, thank you very much. This has been certainly the most interesting project, challenge that I have worked with, I think, in my life. And I couldn't do it without all of you. And I really appreciate everyone here at the table and all the work that has gone in. And, it hasn't been easy, but we've all been, working towards the same goal of permanent flood protection and treating the landowners as respectfully as we possibly, and fairly as we possibly could. And that's taken a big effort of all of you here and the staff as well. So kudos to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will miss you all too.
I'm sure.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other business?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
may I be heard? The loss that land management is going to suffer is small compared to what the Cass County Commission is going to suffer.
Oh, thank you.
With your 12 years of service, I've sat beside you for many of those years, and I've depended upon your comments and choice for oftentimes on votes that are somewhat controversial. Thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for the county service.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I truly appreciate that. And I just want to reiterate again, too, that, Jake has been with me. In fact, when I first ran for office, Jake was the first guy that called me and said, if you want to put your sign in my yard, you can. So I didn't know where his yard was, I don't know how much drive-by traffic I got off that sign, but Jake has really worked hard on this project too, and the Cheyenne diversion before that. So, I really appreciate that. And Commissioner Breitling, you sit in on all of those joint board meetings. I know you do because I sit in on them as well. And a lot of work goes in on those joint board meetings. I've never sat in on a Minnesota one, but I'm sure you guys are working hard over there too. So. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to miss you all. Thank you. Next board meeting. One other thing, Cass County is the only county in North Dakota that has term limits. So, so you lose a lot of institutional knowledge when you have two commissioners go off at the same time. Chad Peterson and I will both be gone. So, but call us anytime. I'll see if I can remember. Okay, we don't know what the next board meetings.
No, I mean, I would love to get one in before the end of the calendar year. So you might see one, but I know we talked about some challenges in our schedule and whether or not that would happen in November before you come off the board. So.
Okay, great. All right. Well, with that then, we are adjourned. Thank you all.